Good afternoon. I'm Russell Wooldridge, Senior Director of Business Development for DRI International, and I'm pleased to welcome our state emergency management community to a special live, invitation-only webinar on how leaders in the public sector have introduced and integrated business continuity training and the impact it's had on their teams and their regions. We know that you, COOP coordinators and OEM officials around the country, are the backbone of this country's continuity of operations, and we want to support you by providing this type of information, especially to you this afternoon. After we're done today, we'll reach out to each of you and send you a copy of this presentation or a link to this presentation, along with DRI's latest white paper outlining the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, or MDEM's, experience with statewide business continuity training. We'll also tell you more about a couple of upcoming sampling courses that will be available to you and your agencies at the state and local level so that you can get a taste and you can try out the training before you bring it back to your agencies. First, we'll be hearing from Ken Maloney and Brian Bauer of the Maryland Office of Emergency Management, or MDEM, and then Alex Abdun-Nabi, Emergency Preparedness Manager for Austin, Texas's CAPMET public transportation system. He'll also be providing his experience as well. While you're listening, we welcome you to send in your questions. Type them in the chat box to one side of the screen or your other, and we'll address them during the post Q&A session. Now, for full disclosure, my family and I are residents of the state of Maryland, and I could not be happier to know that our state has made the commitment to professionalism and continuity by turning to DRI for training and certification. And that effort has been led by two of today's SMEs. Gentlemen that I have been fortunate enough to know now for a few years, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say. So, Brian and Kenny, you're up.
All right, well, thank you very much, Russell, and thank you all for joining us today. It's a great honor to be here. Again, Ken and I have joined the DRI family now for a couple of years, and our experience has been phenomenal. So we're going to walk you through a presentation today, something similar if anybody who was in Austin may have seen with us, but we're really going to talk about how we've decided to improve the state's overall organizational resiliency at both a statewide level, across the state enterprise, as well as within the Department of Emergency Management, and how we took DRI training and really brought that through as kind of the key baseline to build out that organizational and overall operational resilience. So, Ken, next slide. So we'll give you kind of a quick agenda. We'll do more introductions for both Ken and myself. We'll talk a little bit about where we came from and how we got to this point, where we are now in our program, and then kind of where we're heading, where we're going, and what those goals and activities look like, and how DRI has been the linchpin to that success and to what our future looks like. And then we're happy to take any questions. And as was previously said by Russell, this presentation will be shared with the group. So next slide. So just a little bit about each of us. So again, I'm Brian Bauer. I serve as the Preparedness Branch Manager for the Department of Emergency Management. I also serve as one of the Deputy Coordinators for the state's Type 3 Incident Management Team. At the Department of Emergency Management, I oversee our Planning and Assessment Unit, our Training and Exercise Unit, State Continuity Unit, and lastly, our Cyber Preparedness Unit. So overseeing both continuity and cyber puts us in a great position to really achieve the linkages and the synergies for true operational resilience within our own department, and then again taking that and doing a force multiplier out to the statewide enterprise. But now I'll turn it over to Ken.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Maloney. Like Brian said, I am the State Continuity Unit Supervisor here at the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. In that capacity, I oversee statewide continuity of operations, planning, training, and exercise as far as COOP is concerned. I also oversee continuity of government for our executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government, and then the overarching macro enduring constitutional government plan for the state of Maryland. Additionally, within MDEM's continuity program, we oversee our vital records and retention program, as well as our continuity communications and IT program. So all things continuity. It's kind of my bailiwick within the department, and then managing that statewide for all of our departments, agencies, entities, and offices. So we're going to start things off by talking about where we came from, kind of the history of what business continuity looks like and cyber resilience within the state of Maryland. So COVID was really the big nexus for what really triggered us needing to have these robust continuity plans. So as you can see on screen, February of 20, when things really started to kick off, we reached out, or the governor's office in Maryland reached out to us and directed that all of our executive branch departments submit their agency COOP plans to their department. So this was really the beginning of what COOP would become within the state. So prior to October of 20, when this law passed, and I'm going to get into in a minute, there were no formalized programs within MDEM. It was really a function of our training and exercise unit and our planning unit. But we saw the need for this based on COVID to really build out a truly robust program within the department. So as you can see, Maryland Public Safety Code 14-116 passed October 1st of 2020 and codified the need for the state continuity unit and the idea that all executive departments needed to have comprehensive continuity of operations plans submitted to the department for us to review and approve annually. So January of 21, the state continuity unit was formally established, and it started out small. It started out with 2 folks in the unit, so myself and one subordinate. From there, we have grown extensively, and we have 6 authorized positions that work within the state continuity unit, and we are really working to build out what is truly comprehensive continuity for the public sector to really be able to hold a candle to any other state in the nation. And then July 22nd was our first kind of drop dead date for our executive departments where they had to submit those COOP plans to MDEM. Within 14-116, there are 9 tenets that need to be marked within each COOP plan to ensure that every state department was compliant. So that law really gave us the teeth to move forward and make sure that all of us were reading from the same sheet of music. So fast forward to where we are now and what business continuity and cyber resilience look like within state government. So there are 2 angles that we really look at when it came to attacking what continuity would look like in the state of Maryland. The first was training. So I come from a background within emergency management, traditionally from a planning perspective. So continuity was not my wheelhouse. Back in November of 21, back in January of 21, when I came into this role, I started going on a fact-finding mission. I wanted to determine what the industry standard was to really unravel what training I needed to get myself up to snuff as far as what business continuity looks like and being able to take that and convert it to a public sector and statewide approach. So they have the FEMA courses, which are very good courses, but they are generally geared towards the federal government, and they really don't address that continuity at the local and state level, and really the importance of why the private sector takes it so seriously. So as you can see, November of 21, I began exploring these courses. I got in contact with Russell, and we hosted an internal offering with myself and my counterpart within the continuity program to really be guinea pigs to get this kind of program off the ground. I was very pleased with the BCLE 2000 course that I took, and then from there, really use that as a test case to say, hey, look, if I'm going to be working with 29 other continuity coordinators across the state of Maryland, I want to make sure that we all understand each other. We all are reading from the same sheet of music. So that was really the birth of what we have now today. So in May of 22, we hosted our first business continuity and cyber resilience classes that we offered statewide. So we did a targeted approach for our cyber class, and we invited our continuity coordinators for the departments for our business continuity class. Those classes were so successful that we went ahead and had a second round of courses. So as you can see, we had approximately 100 staff going across all different disciplines to really make sure that when we start talking about the different pieces of continuity, including records management, disaster recovery, IT, IT and continuity communications, we really wanted to make sure that everybody knew what was going on together. So from there, we've obviously had a lot of folks get their ABCPs, their certified business continuity professionals, and same with our associate cyber and certified cyber resilience professionals. So that was the big piece first, getting everyone on the same sheet of music, the same page, and really building from there. Next, we move on to planning. So currently we are reviewing and confirming compliance, like I said, for those 40 COOP plans across the Maryland departments. And we've gone through the first round as of July of last year. This is the second year we're going through that. So we've added some other departments, tweaked our template and our guide slightly to make sure that we are really building robust plans and ensuring that we all are understanding how important continuity is. And finally, the review process is based on not only Maryland state law, but the federal guidance that FEMA offers, and then the DRI best practices that we learned through the courses that we've taken here in the state. Brian?
All right, thanks, Ken. So kind of where we're heading. So again, to add on to Ken, this was a very successful effort that Ken piloted, and we had a lot of really great positive feedback, and that kind of continued to press our future outlook. So next slide, please. So kind of where we're going. So our goal at this point is we are continuing our training effort. We're continuing the integration of the concepts and principles around the wider business continuity, disaster recovery, and cyber resilience into the products and the programs that we're building within the state, and then pushing that down to support our locals. But really, the ultimate goal is we want to go after the organizational, from a MDEM organization, the Center of Excellence and Resilience for the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. That is our penultimate goal, and we feel that certification through DRI is really the true ultimate expression of the work that we have done and showing others that we can do that same level of effort. So with that, in addition to the certification, as I said, we're taking these concepts, these programmatic elements, and embedding them, so truly to give us a good holistic program across our operational resilience, and particularly the continuity program elements. And this is where we see the synergies that are really coming across from looking at government essential functions under our continuity of operations program. We also really came to the conclusion after taking the BCLE courses that we have a lot of revenue generating entities within state government. And we were leaving that component out of our overall COOP planning because it's not traditional business continuity. But we wanted to bring that back into the fold and started having state agencies look at where are you actually generating revenue, and how do we build an attachment to your regular COOP plan that looks at the traditional business continuity model. Looking at the overall integration of where disaster recovery fits into continuity. So this is where we said, okay, our IT professionals are sitting in a corner by themselves. We need to re-engage this conversation and put our continuity practitioners, our IT professionals, and our cybersecurity professionals together in a holistic approach for how we then build that out. So we will now have as Ken has built for us, we have 6 standard courses of action in all state continuity of operations plans. And our COA number 6 is non-technical workarounds, and that is a direct build for Ken. And with that, that's where we bring in that integration of where disaster recovery and cyber resilience planning meets continuity. So now we have a non-technical document that looks at where DR and CRIP fit. And now we then can bridge over to our IT professionals with the disaster recovery plans or the cyber incident response plans. So we now have true synergies, true integration, and there is no obstacles to having a unified effort across the entire operational resilience domain. And that's just kind of in our phase 1. Our goal is to each year that we do our updates is add more to it, find additional areas that we need to bridge into. Next slide. With the planning mandates, again, we already have all of our primary executive departments. We have many of our key independent agencies. The goal is for further expansion through either collaborative partnership or through additional law, where we bridge this to the plethora of other independent agencies. And then we're also working within our local jurisdiction partners. So in the state level, we have 26 emergency management jurisdictions that are our primaries, and then we have 155 additional municipalities. Through several efforts on both the continuity and the cyber front, we're working to bring these elements and providing guides, templates, and direct technical assistance to those parties. Because again, we look at the summation of all political subdivisions as a totality of the state's vested interest in where we stand in both continuity and operational resilience. But from here, I'll turn things back over to Ken to talk about kind of where we're heading across the training and the exercise domain.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. So within the training perspective of where we're going, we want to really continue to push the need to have the FEMA standard be embraced by our continuity practitioners with the understanding that that is only part of the picture, which is where DRI comes in. So you'll see the bolded terms on the screen, the business continuity for OEM, and then the cyber resilience for OEM. So working with DRI, we were able to create a hybrid course that really brought together the business continuity aspect with cyber, and then the cyber aspect with continuity. So essentially, I saw the gap that existed within the state where we had non-technical continuity practitioners working with technical cyber practitioners, and they were never actually working together. They were in two silos side by side. So when we started inviting folks to come and take these courses, we wanted to make sure we started some of this cross-training, because anybody that's on the line that's ever dealt with any kind of cyber incident or any kind of continuity incident, you know, when you talk about essential systems and where they're located, we need to make sure that we bring those IT professionals to the table to really limit our recovery time objectives and minimize our recovery point objectives. So this cross-training is really where DRI has come in and really helped the state kind of build things out. So through the first offering, I mentioned before that the continuity course really focused on those non-technical continuity practitioners. The cyber course was targeted cyber professionals. And then our second round offering was doing our best to kind of cross-train and invite those additional folks who may be wearing a second hat supporting continuity or disaster recovery. So we want to continue to build that out with these new courses that DRI has put together for us, and really continue to push this narrative and this standard across the state as we move forward. Because I look at building capacity within the state as being just as critical as having robust plans. When something happens, I need to make sure that the folks that I will be working with to support that event or that disaster really understand continuity at a foundational level and can bring the right players to the table. So additionally, we talk about the workshops. One of the things that we do within MDEM is we provide very hands-on technical assistance workshops for plan development and refinement. That is a product of the fact that I have, like I said, a 6-person team. So I'm very fortunate to be able to have the resources to bring to bear within the state. We do workshops surrounding continuity of operations and business continuity planning, continuity communications, such as satellite communications or other alternate forms of communications when you don't have traditional means. The idea of wrapping our head around devolution at the state level. The federal government does devolution very well. For state governments, particularly a small state like Maryland, devolution is a challenge, but we want to make sure that folks are at least thinking about devolution as we move forward. And then the final one there, the BIA and BPA. So many of the state departments in Maryland don't have the bandwidth to conduct comprehensive business impact analyses and business process analyses. So here in the state, we've developed a hybrid essential function analysis that takes some of the components of DRI, some of the components of FEMA, and some in-house components, and builds out a BIA light, if you will, to make sure we can identify and prioritize essential functions within departments and then rank those functions. So in the event that we do have a gray or black sky event that is truly catastrophic, we can understand the order that essential functions need to be turned back on to preserve life, incident stabilization, and property in the environment. So it really kind of comes back to the tenets of emergency managers and getting them to understand where business continuity really crosses over and becomes relevant to them. You know, a lot of the times we notice folks taking the BCLE class from an emergency management perspective, we're kind of tuning out when they heard the word business. The concepts are the same, it's just the application that's different. So that's really the bridge that we are trying to the gap we are trying to bridge here within the state. And then finally, we have exercises. So we've conducted, we plan to conduct discussion-based and operational exercises to validate these plans and evaluate our capabilities. In closing with the exercise piece, I will say it's my goal to create exercises that fail. This way I can show leadership that we have these gaps, because myself and Brian as the SMEs know these gaps exist. We want to exploit these gaps and really get the resources from our leadership to close these gaps and build out true, redundant, and strong continuity plans here within the state of Maryland. This really has come as a need, seeing things like cyber events and COVID, really making this not so much your cookie cutter exercises where folks just want to check a box and move on, but really pushing our capabilities and our resources to the max to understand if we are truly continuity strong and redundant here within the state of Maryland. So having said that, I know we're not taking questions now, but please feel free to have your questions ready for when we move to the end of the presentation, or put them in the chat like Russell had mentioned so we could talk about anything after the fact. And I will briefly leave our contact information up on screen here for anyone that wants to get in touch with us. We're happy to help or give best practices that we've used here within the state. Having said all that, Russell, I will hand it back to you.
Ken, real fast, I think one thing just to add for our emergency management partners. So as Ken mentioned, he took a lot of effort to build that essential function analysis, or that BIA light. One of the things that we leveraged heavily is both our THIRA, our threat and hazard identification risk assessment, and our HIRA, our hazard identification and risk assessment from our continuity shop, to build a lot of the data behind that essential function analysis. So again, if you were doing a true traditional BIA, you would do a lot of the same data collection as part of that. So we leverage the THIRA and the HIRA data to help give us that initial kick. But that's it.
Well, thanks, guys. I got to tell you, the next round of crab cakes and Natty Bows are on me. Okay. Next, I'm pleased to welcome CAPMET's Alex Abdun-Nabi to talk to us about his experience. Go ahead, Alex. Take it away.
All right. Howdy, y'all. Let me just pull up my slides real quick. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you a little bit about CAPMetro and our emergency management / continuity interface. Kind of what we see here is continuity is two sides of the same coin. Continuity and emergency management are really so heavily related, and we have ways that we'll talk about as we get through this presentation that we try and bridge the gap and sort of almost eliminate and kind of get rid of that distinction between continuity and emergency management. And we'll talk more about that as we get into it a little bit. But what is CAPMetro? So I'm here in Austin. We are the transportation authority. We are an independent authority. So what that means is we're not part of a city or a county or another local jurisdiction. We're our own transportation authority. We're a government agency, but we also act a little bit more like a business. We're a little bit more independent, a little bit more flexible than your average government agency. We cover a service area of 544 square miles. We got a population of 1.3 million and growing. It seems like everybody wants to move to Austin at the moment. We got lots happening here. We're at about 20.5 million trips a year. So we're moving lots of folks every day to and from both essential trips, like things to the doctor's offices and essential workers at grocery stores and hospitals and all sorts of other essential workers, but also for people who just want to go out and explore the city and take advantage of all the great things Austin has to offer. In terms of our size, we're significantly smaller than like a state OEM. My background prior coming to here at Metro, I was with the state of Texas as the deputy logistics chief, and prior to that, I was with the state of Michigan as the state training officer and logistics chief. So, this is a different animal in some ways than a state level emergency management organization or state level continuity program. But a lot of the things that we see with our 400 buses, 200 paratransit vehicles, and 10 trains, that's kind of, we provide one essential service rather than a bunch of essential services like perhaps a state agency does. But, we pride ourselves on being able to provide those services during just about any scenario, except apparently when it snows. So as you may be aware, Texas doesn't snow very often. It doesn't have a lot of snow. We're not really good at it. We don't have the equipment that's required. And so over the last 3 years, we have faced 3 severe winter storms. Winter Storm Uri, which y'all may remember, was right sort of smack dab after vaccines started coming out during COVID. So we had a combination of a COVID response in addition to a winter storm response. And that one was the one you may remember where the Texas grid, which is known as ERCOT, came about 9 minutes from a catastrophic black sky collapse. So we were pretty close to things that generally you only talk about in exercises. Since then, we've had 2 other winter storms, which, while not as severe, certainly impacted our ability to provide our key services. We, like I said, we transport folks to all sorts of types of venues, both for fun, for business, for pleasure, but also life-sustaining. You can see that picture there of our Metro Access or paratransit vehicles. They're actually taking folks to dialysis. And we do several hundred dialysis trips every single day. So those are some of the kind of things that, when we talk about life safety or life sustaining within an incident, we don't think transit, right? You generally think fire, law enforcement, EMS, public works, hospitals, healthcare, those kinds of things. But, we generally don't think about transit. But we learned during those types of incidents that being able to continue providing those types of services is really, really critical to ensuring the health and safety of our community. So we weren't necessarily keeping all the lights on in all of our facilities and all the lights on in all of our services, but we identified the ones that would be essential to help keep the lights on in our community and keep people alive. So each of those incidents, we faced pretty significant challenges. We had significant lack of personnel. We normally have something in the order of 200 paratransit operators driving those vehicles every single day. We have 200 something bus operators driving the buses every day at any given time. And we really didn't have access to those personnel. Like I said, roads were, you can see sort of the pictures, roads were pretty iced over and inaccessible, and we don't know how to drive in the snow. People go really fast and end up really far in the ditch. And that's a challenge when you're trying to transport your essential personnel in, right? So we have our dispatch folks, all of our folks that keep the system running, but we also have our frontline personnel who we really couldn't do anything without. So that was a significant challenge for us. I already mentioned ERCOT, the electric grid, and the significant challenge there where we could have lost it and been on generator power for potentially months, as we did as a black start. But we also lost running water in some of our facilities and weren't able to have either fire suppression systems or just running water at all when we had folks sleeping over in those facilities. Additionally, we lost facility access in general, right? We just couldn't get to some places, or the folks who were there couldn't get out. So we couldn't reach them. We couldn't provide them with additional resources. And then lastly, communications with the grid and significant power outages across our entire region. Again, we serve that 544 square mile area. We were having difficulty communicating, with a lot of our key staff, with cell phones, towers being down, and internet access or power being intermittent. And even with those who had hotspots or had, satellite devices or any of that kind of stuff, at some point, the battery on that no longer works, right? It's just going to run out. And if you have no power to recharge it, you are pretty much out of commission. So we faced a lot of different challenges that really highlighted for us the need to do continuity planning, right? What we ultimately learned is that if you can't keep the lights on internally, if you can't keep your people in communication with each other, you can't get your folks into the facilities and make sure they have the resources that they need, that you can't effectively respond on the emergency side, right? We don't consider ourselves first responders, but we do consider ourselves community responders, right? We go out there and help the community any way that we can. And we didn't have continuity plans that were strong enough or detailed enough or had considered a scenario where this kinds of thing happens. Austin doesn't get hurricanes like other parts of Texas. So it wasn't something that we had really considered. And so we learned that we needed to draw on both our continuity concepts and training, and I'll talk a little bit more about where we're headed in that direction, but we needed to draw on those kinds of concepts and the training that comes with it to be successful. And we also needed to draw on the emergency management training that our folks have had, or the experience that our folks have had. We've had some folks here who have tremendous experience in all sorts of different areas. And so we use our EOC concept to manage both our continuity and our emergency management response. With that internal, how do we keep the lights on? And then the external, once we have the lights on, how do we use the resources that we have? And it's the same group of people that do both. And so we found our best approach so far, using the training and the experience that these folks have, is we kind of treat it all as emergency activity, right? Continuity and emergency management are two sides of the house. If we can't keep the lights on, we can't do the things we need to do. But we also need to make sure we're responding to community needs, and that we utilize both our emergency management processes and our continuity processes to address that. So kind of what we learned and where we're going, one of the things that we figured out, and this is something that we learned afterwards in our after action processes and through training, is that we had plans and they were good on paper, right? Every plan is good on paper until you start using it. But they didn't cover the severity of what we experienced, and particularly with COVID, right? We couldn't put as many people in our facilities. We had a lot of folks working from home. So how do you run an EOC where everybody's virtual and it's not necessarily safe to put 30 or 40 people in a conference room? That was one of the things we really hadn't thought about before. And that was Winter Storm Uri, and then again for Mara, and then in Landon, our two most recent storms. We learned that our continuity plans, while they had improved, we had a lot of conversations about how we support our folks and how we keep the lights on. We didn't have written solid plans that said, this is how we're going to do it. We hadn't done that business impact analysis, or, we're moving towards that essential function analysis that Ken talked about, a very similar concept. but we hadn't really finished that process, and we learned a lot from all those things, that we needed some training, that we needed some planning. We had fuel shortages, personnel shortages, water shortages, and we didn't have specific plans on how we were going to address that. We burned somewhere in the realm of 15 to 20,000 gallons of diesel a day, because driving buses around takes fuel. And while we keep about 10 days on hand, when we're using it to run our generators and our fleet, we came with in about 2 days of running out, which for us is really, on that threshold of not being able to run normal operations, having to cut back until we can figure out where our next fuel delivery is going to come from. So we had to spend a lot of time thinking about what our challenges were, and where we're going to go from here. And the other thing that we found was that our COOP plans, they weren't really written necessarily with the audience in mind. Who are the end users of our plans, right? We spent a lot of time. Originally, we had thought, we had these pretty good templates. They weren't the strongest things we'd ever seen, but we thought they would work for our agency. We were pretty small at the time. We've been growing a lot. We've seen a lot of change with our agency, even between COVID and now, with mostly remote work, but also we've just grown. Our staff has almost doubled in the last, I would say, 3 to 4 years. And so our plans were written for an organization that had a pretty strong culture of, we know who does what, and we know who to call when things happen. But it was very much a people-centric, process, not necessarily process-oriented. So one of the things we've looked at doing in our revamp, one of the things we've needed to go through, training and work with our partners, and that's at FEMA and our state office of risk management, who does the same job that Ken does up in Maryland, is identify who our audience is. And that was something that's really important that we found, is who are the plans actually for, and how do they experience the plans and understand them. And that comes with training, right? So there's the COOP level training that the emergency management team, so myself and my team, have done. But there's also that next level of, okay, you're not a COOP person, but you have a job that is essential. How do you understand what these plans are for? How do you use them? How do you turn these documents into an operational action that sustains our operations and our organization and our ability to support our community when they need it the most? So that was one of the big things that we learned, and we're looking to leverage that and the existing training that DRI and our FEMA partners and our state partners and all the others in the field really have out there already, so we're not reinventing the wheel. So kind of where we're going, we're doing a ground up refresh of our continuity plans, and that launched pretty recently. We've been meeting with every single department, and we're essentially walking them through that essential function analysis kind of thing that Ken and Brian mentioned earlier in Maryland. Where we're just saying, tell us how you do your job every day. Tell us what it is you do, and then we can identify, based off of our criteria, which of those we consider mission essential, which of those we consider essential supporting activities. And we're actually building a physical map. Well, I guess it's a digital map, but it's a visual map of, we're gonna put all of our functions in this, all of our personnel, all of our facilities, all of our IT systems, all of our external dependencies. We're going to put it on one map so we can actually see what we are dependent on during an emergency. So if we have a radio system and we want to see which functions that are dependent on that, because right now it's pretty obvious that our dispatch system is, and it's pretty obvious that bus, rail, and our paratransit system are, but our public safety system uses the radio. Sometimes our planning team uses the radio. Lots of all these folks that we wouldn't necessarily think of as being dependent on our radio system actually are, for a variety of things. So that map is going to help us determine, that ranking of which of our systems is most important. Where are our true tier 1 systems? We have a pretty good idea, but no one's ever done that level of analysis. And that came out of some training and some meetings and some conversations we had with some of our peers and our partners. And that's something we really want to do. And we've started that already. We've completed it for one of our departments, and we're going to keep going with our other key departments to start and just see, where are our dependencies. We all use Teams. We're all dependent on SharePoint, all that kind of stuff. So, that's one of the big things that we're working on. We're also working on training. So we just finished our emergency response training. That's like that phase 1 of okay, what is it I do in addition to my job to help people during an emergency? with our continuity plan, underway, we're already looking ahead towards, okay, how do we introduce these continuity plans, these continuity concepts? And what we're looking at is we're looking at leveraging a lot of this existing training that's out there and just customizing it. Because again, I may not be able to get my folks into an 8-hour continuity course or a 2-day continuity course put on by some of our partners. But if I can take those critical concepts and turn those into a 4-hour course or an online module, or we can build it into toolbox talks, that allows us to get continuity and resilience, which I'll talk a little bit more about with our Ready Volunteer Operator program. We can really spread those ideas throughout our organization. So it's not just, me and the public safety team or our leadership who are emphasizing the importance of continuity and resilience. It's everybody who understands that in my small little way, I contribute to the massive success of our organization during an emergency, right? I have a small part, but together we all make a successful response or successful continuity, event response. So it's an opportunity for us to blur those lines between continuity and emergency management. A lot of our folks don't use the terms continuity, emergency management. They just use the term, it's an emergency, we need to do stuff, right? And so how do we explain to them that there is a difference, but also oftentimes if you're having an emergency response, you're also having a continuity event, right? It's very rare that you're not impacted in some way by an event that requires you to do an emergency response. So we found success in our continuity conversations in our EM training program by leveraging familiar language for these new topics, leveraging our existing processes and building on them in these trainings. And then finally, one of the things that we're really most excited about in terms of our next step forward is our Ready Volunteer Operator program. So it's designed to promote resilience among our essential staff. And our essential staff, for us, we have all sorts of different categories, but the ones that we have identified are probably the most capable, most important, and probably the most vulnerable in many ways, are our operators and mechanics, the folks who actually keep the buses and the paratransit vehicles running out in the community during an emergency or during an incident that would require us to activate our continuity plan. So we're trying to provide them with information and supplies to prepare their families for their absence so that they feel that they can come in and make that difference in our community. They're employees of CAPMET directly, but we actually don't employ the operators directly. All the folks who drive the buses and maintain them, all the technicians and the mechanics, they work for a variety of our service provider contractors. We contract out all that service for a variety of reasons. So we are not only working with our policies and our expectations of them, but also their direct employers' policies and expectations. So one of the things we're trying to do with this is set out very clear expectations as an agency across all of our different modes and all of our different contractors and service providers and union members, what we're going to ask of them and what they can expect from us to support them. So our trainings that we're working through right now sort of have 4 elements. One is, what can you expect? When you come in here, we'll provide you COTS, we'll provide you MREs. They're not delicious, they'll keep you alive. How are you going to get paid? How long do we expect you to be here? All that kind of stuff. And then we're building on that sort of very traditional ready.gov sort of style format for emergency preparedness, about being informed, having a plan, and building a kit. And right now we've got a funding request pending in our budget cycle to be able to distribute a starter emergency kit for each volunteer at the conclusion of the training. So once you volunteer and you've gone through the training and you understand the importance of doing all this and what we expect of you, we're going to hand these folks an emergency kit and say, take this home. It's yours to keep. This is, our commitment to you is that we're going to provide you the resources so that you can come be a resource for us during an emergency, whether that's a continuity event where we need to move 200 buses off of our bus yard because it's flooding, or whether we need to help evacuate a nursing home because it doesn't have power in the middle of a snowstorm or a heat wave. I mean, it's reached, almost 120 heat index here over this week. And that's one of the other things is like, how do we move folks around and keep them safe? And I can't say we take all the credit for this. I'm going to give some credit to the Michigan State Police Emergency Management Homeland Security Division. They have a great program called Ready Responder, which is a very similar concept. They essentially treat everyone in their agency as a responder, and they hand out emergency kits and do training and emphasize that resilience is really important. They do continual follow-up. This is a really great program, and I just wanted to give them a shout out because they did all the heavy lifting to get us kind of where we're headed, and they are willing to share that information. They have a sort of a debranded template they're willing to send out to anybody. So if you're looking to do anything remotely similar to this in your organization, this is a great resource to look at. So again, that's more training. It's not necessarily the emergency management training or the COOP training that's, for practitioners. It's for folks that actually are going to be impacted by these events. So ultimately, what does this mean, right? For you as an emergency management practitioner or continuity practitioner, more resilient staff mean more successful responses, right? And that comes from training, that comes from exercising, that comes from provision of resources. Plans that have built-in contingencies or the contingency requirements, we try and build in, this is what a minimum thing we would need to do to provide this service, but what are our alternatives if we can't do that? Those things will be more successful, and we socialize that through our training and development processes for our plans. Ultimately, if you enable your staff to be resilient through training, you're more likely to be successful in any sort of emergency response or continuity response that you're likely to face. COOP training, as I've sort of talked about, the DRI or FEMA or any of those great resources that are out there, those trainings can be really useful for your emergency management or senior public safety leadership teams. And then resiliency training, even if it's just starting small with, have a kit, have a plan, be informed, and building from there, is a really good way to kind of get your feet under you and start building towards those programs like Maryland has, where they've got, a much bigger comprehensive program. We're a lot smaller, a lot fewer resources, trying to find a way to operationalize all these things. So that training means that everybody from our CEO down to a bus operator on the street or a public safety ambassador, they understand that being prepared is more than just how to do the job. It includes how do we do the job when we don't have the things we normally have, whether that's fuel, whether that's roads, whether that's communications tools. How do we do that? And giving them those resources is really, really important. So ultimately what we found so far, and again, this is a project that's ongoing and evolving, is reaching people where they are, right? Using language they're familiar with, reaching them in training formats they're familiar with, gives us a better chance of success than sort of this one top-down universal approach. Taking an iterative, layered approach is also really, really important. And that involves giving folks tools to build resilience in small ways and then ultimately in big ways. So it's not always classroom training. It's not always something that is a one and done. We try and emphasize these things annually or biannually as the seasons change, which in Texas we have hot and not hot. Those are our two seasons. So as those change, we try and change our focus on still making sure our folks are resilient, but giving them different resources to do that given the conditions. Ultimately, leveraging our wins. If once we've gotten folks to understand that this part of it is really important, then moving on to the next piece of now you have your kid, now you have a plan, now you're informed. Okay, what's the next piece of that? How do you think about doing your job without a resource? Even if you're just thinking about it, that's a win for us. And then finally, again, focusing on our audience. Our audience is, diverse. We have all sorts of different positions. We have all sorts of different age groups, socioeconomic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds here at Metro, and everybody has different expectations. So we try and tailor that messaging and that resilience training to those expectations and to their backgrounds and communities, so that they have a better chance of identifying with at least something we're putting out there. And for us, again, that's a win. We'll take, a little bit of building a resilient culture. It takes over a long time and lots of little actions, not a couple of big ones. So that's just from us, that's the importance of training. That's the importance of building resources out in the community for our folks in our community. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that y'all may have. So thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
All right, thank you, Alex. We're going to get to questions in a minute, but that was a very informative case study. Well presented. And I'll tell you, we all enjoyed Austin at last year's DRI conference. So thank you for making the presentation. And we're going to go, if you can stop sharing your screen for me. There we go. I'm going to invite our folks from MDEM to come back. And we've got some questions, 7 or 8 of them. I think we've got a little time to go through. We can, of course, get more. If you have additional questions, you can put them in the chat. But I think the first question I'm just going to open up to the floor. The roles of emergency managers continue to do you see the roles of emergency managers continuing to overlap into other disciplines? Brian, go.
Absolutely. I mean, emergency management has been and will forever be a evolving discipline. I think, we can't put it into a box. So what is it? It's emergency managers are people who can bring complex problem-solving skills and can bring the way to connect people through relationships, process, and produce an end result, either problem solve or courses of action to come to the problem solve. So I think, yes, it will always overlap, but we do our greatest piece, which is bring the right parties to the table and do stakeholder engagement. So yes, and I think we can make it always work.
Okay. Alex, any addition to that?
I think Brian hit it on the head. I tell folks I'm an emergency manager. I don't have skills of any kind. My job is to connect people who know things to other people who know things to solve problems. And my job is to keep people talking. So, whether that's continuity, whether that's cyber, whether that's AI, whatever the new shiny toy is that causes us problems or solves us, solves the issues that we're facing, our job is just to leverage those things and bring the right people together. So I think Brian's exactly right.
So I'm going to throw this one at you. What do you think resilience means to you in your agency? We've talked a lot about continuity of operations, obviously COOP and continuity, but when you hear the word resiliency, how does that play up at CAPMET?
Yeah, at CAPMetro, we really focus on resiliency in a couple of ways. One is sort of that traditional, do we know where to go when our building blows up? Do we know where to go when we don't have communication? But we also look at it as our staff. We can do lots of things without lots of equipment, but we can't do it without our people. And so making sure our people are equipped and understand what they can do to keep themselves safe is probably our biggest resiliency target. Because it allows us to do a lot more things, right? If we have people who are willing to drive a vehicle, then we can solve all sorts of problems. We can turn a bus into a mobile pod. We can do water delivery door to door for folks who can't get to points of distribution. We can do all sorts of other things, but that requires our people to be willing and able, and more importantly, able to be able to get out of their homes and provide those services to our community. So that's really what we focus on when we say resiliency.
Guys, what does MDEM think of the terminology resilience, and how is that playing into what MDEM is doing these days?
I would agree, Russell. Yeah, I would agree, Russell. I would just say that I think the baseline of what operational resilience looks like for MDEM starts with continuity, right? And then it expands from there. So it's ensuring that we can continue to make sure those essential functions are being carried out throughout a disruption, right? And then really marrying that up with our folks who handle risk management and cyber resilience and technical cybersecurity and physical security, and really having it branch across multiple disciplines to really achieve that true resilience. But one of the things that I always preach is that every event in some capacity is a continuity event. And if you don't have that baseline established, you're not going to be truly resilient. So I think it starts with continuity and then just expands across that. But I'll hand it over to Brian.
No, I couldn't agree more with Ken. And I think, the tough part is resiliency has been a concept in practice for years, but really has made its reemergence in the emergency management community over the last 2 or 3 years. And most of the time when we hear resilience brought up, we're really talking, from a macro emergency management world, mitigation, sustainability, climate change. Great things and very important things, but we're leaving out large pieces of the totality of resilience. And I think this is where, there is big R resilience, and then there is the little r resilience components that make that up. And I think, as Ken said, that operational resilience, starting with continuity and having the interdependencies and linkages of continuity, business continuity, disaster recovery, cyber resilience, all have to be melded and put together in the right way with the right parties to give you, you as an organization, you as a political subdivision, being a local jurisdiction, the state, a well-founded platform in which to continue your operations. Because if we can't do that, we can't do any of the other work in the bigger R resilience world.
Right. So sometimes these questions come in like themes, and one of the themes that keeps coming up in the questions that I'm looking at are how are you getting engagements from your various government departments on continuity of operations initiatives? This is specifically at MDEM, you guys are doing a really broad, statewide focus on, in the executive branch. What are your recommendations on how to track and how to get people thinking about that?
So I'll start from MDEM's perspective. I've been very fortunate because I have the teeth of legislation. If you can find a way to get some of this stuff written into law, it will make your life very, very easy. But beyond that, the other major benefit that I have is senior leadership buy-in. You can't get programs like this off the ground unless you have your senior leaders buying into what you're doing, providing the resources necessary to execute that, and then really letting you loose to kind of run and spread that word. Additionally, we host pretty regular workshops to keep our COOP coordinators engaged and really offer training like this to make sure these folks who are wearing a second and third hat don't feel left out in the cold as just another HR person who's now in charge of COOP or just another finance person who's in charge of COOP. We want to at least get them a baseline, show them that we are there to support them, and then help them garner that leadership buy-in that we have here at MDEM.
Alex, you want to tackle that?
I mean, I think Ken hit it. Executive buy-in is the biggest piece, right? Our deputy CEO and CEO say this is what we're going to do, and so the departments do it. And without that, we would be going, "Hey, can you tell us how you work?" And like that's a priority, but it's not really a priority, And prior to COVID, we got a lot more of that.
So your leadership.
I agree.
So it sounds like over at CAPMET, your leadership's really involved. I mean, I know that they are at MDEM. But is that it? Your leadership is really involved in both the securing the training aspect as well as the continuity piece?
Yeah, actually, absolutely. I recently did our annual COOP kickoff piece with our senior executive and management team, and what our leadership said is 5 years ago we would not have said this was a priority, but between COVID and the 3 winter storms where we shut down service for the first time ever. We were created in 1985 and we had never shut down service, and we've done it for the last 3 years right after I got here, so it's my fault. But those things have really driven the point home, and having that leadership buy-in, they really get it because they've seen the impact that these types of incidents and continuity events have on our ability to provide efficient and safe transit service to the public.
And I think the last question we're going to get to, maybe 2 more, but definitely see how we answer this one. Certification is a big deal around here, around the DRI International. How, for the fellows at MDEM, how is certification making your agency better? How is it improving what you're trying to get done?
So I can kick us off and go to Ken. Number one, certification is important for 2 reasons. One, from an organizational perspective, it assures us as the investment of the funds that we're putting out to provide the training and to cover the first cost of certification to our staff, that we now have a good quality baseline training in all of our staff throughout not just the department, but throughout our state enterprise as a whole. So organizationally, it is a phenomenal option. I guess really we can go with 3 things. So organization is number 1. Number 2 is for the stakeholders that then our certified personnel work with. It gives them a platform of strength to speak from, to say, I have the experience that I've brought to this job from a variety of ways. Plus, on top of that, I'm certified in business continuity, in cyber resilience, in risk management. So it provides that background for them to show why it's important and who they are. And then 3, and again, we talk about this a lot in our offices, the professional development aspect. If we aren't investing in the personal and professional growth of our staff, and the certification is a key piece of it, no one, again, we would love to have our excellent team stay together forever, but that's not the case in today's environment. So if we can help build the capacities and the personal training, for each staff member, and through that certification process, that leads them into a better and bigger position. That's a phenomenal option that we can offer our folks, especially as government civil servants. Ken, anything to add from our side?
No, you nailed it. The summary is building capacity, and I 100% agree. The most important aspect of that is building individual capacity within your people.
Alex, you want to take a shot at that one?
I think they said all that needs to be said on that topic, quite frankly.
Here's another question we've got. Can we talk a little bit about how you structure your essential functions? It sounded interesting. And what are some suggestions to get departments involved in the training? And this person's organization, they tend to be very reluctant.
So I'll start.
Kenny, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll start with how MDEM does it and kick it to Brian, have him kind of backfill. But we kind of took the federal model and expanded upon that, right? So at the federal level, there are national essential functions, and then there are primary mission essential functions that the government undertakes, so on and so forth. Here and within the state of Maryland, Brian was the brainchild of developing state essential functions that we then had primary mission essential functions that state departments carried out that would feed up and support those state essential functions. So your PMIFs, or primary mission essential functions, are the most important things that your department does. They support life safety, they support incident stabilization, they directly tie to a state essential function, and they are truly, if we don't do these, bad things are going to happen. From there, we got our leadership to agree to that list, and then we prioritized that list. And then once that list was written and signed, those are our blue sky priorities as far as ranking. If we have one person at MDEM, they will be doing this job. If they're fortunate enough to get a second person, this is the job they will be doing. So we really built that top-down framework to get them to understand true hierarchy and ranking of functions within a given department and the state as a whole. Brian?
No, and Ken's absolutely right. And, as he said, we took the federal and we built and expanded upon. The one thing that we did is, in addition to the primary mission essential function, the mission essential function, and the essential supporting activities, we also added another tier in that list. And that is what we call a mission enhancing activity, or an MEA. And this is because as we started doing our statutory and legal review on what are the things that are truly, are true responsibilities, true functions that must be carried out against the state essential functions, we had departments and agencies ask us, well, what do I do about all these things that I have to do, or I do on a daily basis, that maybe aren't legally required, that aren't going to help support life safety, aren't going to support a state essential function? We said, great, we will create a new tier, and we'll call it a mission enhancing activity, and we have it very well classified. So as we go down through the process of doing our essential function analysis, nothing is left on the table. We account for every single essential function, every single activity, every single business responsibility that a department or agency has to do, and it's cataloged right there. And then, as Ken said, as you start that rollback, this also helps us as we go through the process of either full devolution, partial devolution, reconstitution, and how we start bringing and turning things back on. And what does that mean as far as using existing staff? If we have to then contract in staff to support things, we can contract in these MEAs because there's nothing legally responsible behind it. In many cases, it doesn't touch any sensitive information or critical systems.
Well, that was a great answer to that question. And unfortunately, I think we're going to have to call it to that point. We will turn back these questions to each of our SMEs, and they can respond to them in the post-event emails. But I'd like to thank Ken and Brian and Alex for their input, and all of you in the audience for your interest in this topic, and for the questions you provided. We'll be making this presentation available to you shortly, including a case study developed by MDEM on the topics you've heard about today, which actually includes the language of the public law that led to them being able to do this training. We'll be making that available as a DRI white paper, and so look forward to seeing that in your inboxes. The other thing you can look forward to is we are doing sampling classes on OEM continuity and OEM resilience in August and September. Look for those in your inbox. Invitations to those in your inboxes as well. We'll also be reaching out to let you know about the upcoming classes for emergency management opportunity. Because you attended this webinar, your team is eligible for some discounts. So I look forward to talking to you folks about that and help you with your training in your departments and your programs soon. As I said before, I'm Russell Wooldridge, Senior Director of Business Development for DRI International. This concludes today's webinar. All rights reserved, DRI 2023. Thank you for your attention.